Okay, so let's go over the historical significance chart together and what you have to do for this. So if we go here, move the slides, there we go. It says modeling historical significance, record evidence on the historical significance military contribution. If you click this, it will bring up a Google Slides that you can edit and add your text into. So I already have this open here. So this is what it looks like. So historical significance. And essentially, it says apply each of the criteria to the battle. Use specific evidence to support your answer. Use language in the criteria in your response. So let's go back here. Let's go back up here. And this is a reminder of the historical significance. So they use a little bit of different language in this infographic that we have, but it's still the same ideas. So prominence, was the person or event recognized as significant at the time? So in 1917 in particular, was Vimy seen as significant? Consequences, what effects did the person or event have? Impact, how widespread was the person or event's impact? How lasting were their impacts, long lasting? So we definitely had that in our criteria as well. And revealing, what does the person or event reveal about the larger historical context or present day issues? Does it inform our understanding of historical issue or period? So essentially, what does it tell us about how we see our world today? What do it tell us about how we view the history back then? What was the impact of today? So we have gone over this criteria several times. Now you're going to use it for exploring the battles. So let's go here. So we're going to fill this out together. Let's zoom out. Let's go to 100%. There we go. Let's click here. So our battle is Vimy Ridge. So you will put your battle that you're doing there. Prominence. The battle was significant at the time because. So now we have to go to the sources that we just explored. So you should look at the article from Veterans Affairs about the Battle of Vimy Ridge, the primary sources that we just explored, and what they said in the video. So using my knowledge from what I've read and watched, I am going to say that yes, the battle was significant at the time. Battle was significant at the time. We see this in how it was written in newspapers at the time. So because it's asking us for the perspective from 1917, our best source, our best piece of evidence that we're going to use to answer this is going to be the primary sources, okay? And in the English source, the Globe, it was very much portrayed as something that was significant. In fact, the opening line is, "The Battle of Arras is the greatest victory we have yet gained in this war." So right away, they are setting the tone that, yes, this is significant to us. So let's add that in. So I've said, yes, the battle was significant at the time. We see this in how it was written in newspapers, especially within the Globe article from April 1917, where the article opens with the statement. And then I'm going to put a quote in here. "The Battle of Arras is the greatest victory we have yet gained in this war and is a staggering blow to the enemy." And there we go. So that is a specific point of evidence that I can draw on to say that it was significant. What else? Well, we can add to this. Why else was this maybe significant at the time? we know from our video and from the Veterans Affairs article that this is the first time all 4 Canadian divisions have come together. So that would have been a significant moment for the Canadian military at the time. So we can say, we also see the significance at the time with the fact that it was the first time all 4 Canadian corps fought together. We can also, so other points you could bring up with this, we could say that it was the first time that they'd fought together. They had been building up to this significant moment, so there was a lot of planning involved. But in the video that you watched, they do talk about how Arthur Currie, one of our generals in the military at the time, was very well known for his planning and his ability. Didn't see Vimy as a real significant battle. He didn't think it was that important. He thought other battles were important. So there was some divide at this point between how it was viewed. And we also heard in the video that one of the historians talked about how French Canadians saw it differently, those in the country and the cities saw it differently. And that was partially because of conscription. And the need for conscription after battles like Vimy Ridge had happened. So we're going to add in a little bit about the divide a bit. So what I'm writing here, guys, definitely please put into your own copy of the Vimy Ridge historical significance. So open your own tab and you can copy exactly what I've said, or you can put it in your own words. Okay. So let's say, how do I want to put this? There is some divide of how Vimy was viewed at the time. Let's see if I can expand this. Might not be able to. I might have to move everything down. I'll say, for example, Arthur Currie did not see it as important as other battles. And let's deal with this now. Okay. So let's make this a little smaller text size. Let's bring this down. There we go. Okay, so here I have a few different points of evidence to show how it was significant at the time. So we talk about how it was written in newspapers, especially in the Globe. We give a quote from the Globe. We talk about how it was the first time all Canadian corps fought together. And we say that there was some divide on how Vimy was viewed. For example, Arthur Currie did not see it as important. So we have 3 different points of evidence to prove that it had some significance at the time, although there was some divide. So, consequence, the most impactful effects of the battle include. So now we need to think of what happened in the battle and the effects. So the battle is the cause. What are the effects? So let's think of kind of what happened because they had rushed the ridge. So our first point could be an impactful effect was how we took Pimple. I'm putting Pimple in quotation marks because that is the name for it. And vantage points on the ridge from the Germans. So the battle happened, and because of the battle, we took the vantage point from the Germans. And the Germans were pushed back further away. Yeah. So essentially they had their stance on the ridge and they just moved their lines further and further back. We can also talk about how Canada as a whole was really impacted at this point in time because the view of the Canadian military was seen as very different. So for months leading up to this point, the British and the French, they had all been trying to attack Vimy Ridge. No one had been able to take the ridge at this point, no matter how long or how hard they tried. And it wasn't until the Canadians actually stepped in and took over and started planning this whole assault that they actually took the ridge. So the major players from the war, the major empires and powerhouses couldn't take it, but our small country of Canada could. So we're going to talk about how Canada gained its recognition. So from the battle, Canada gained a reputation of being a strong military force. Canada proved that they could accomplish a goal when other countries could not. They strategically planned and then successfully executed the attack on Vimy Ridge. Canada was no longer seen as a small military force, just a small part of the British Army. We were our own force. So that is the effect we see, or two effects. There are others that you could talk about as well. We could look at the impactful effects of deaths and casualties, but we're going to look at that a little more in depth in general. But I would say most impactful is that we actually took the pimple, we took the vantage point, so strategically that was an impactful effect for the rest of the war because we held high ground, so looking over on the German territory, which you can read about in the Veterans Affairs article. And then the battle, from the battle, Canada gained a reputation of being a strong military force. We were no longer just seen as another branch of the British military. We were our own fighting force. And we do that in several other battles, but this one as a whole has really regained that reputation, as you probably saw in the video. Okay, impact. This event impacted many people and the effects were long lasting. So let's talk about that. So here's probably the good place for us to talk about the deaths, the casualties, and the prisoners. So let's talk about the Germans first. So in the battle, we know from our primary source that over 10,000 Germans were taken prisoner. So in the battle, over 10,000 Germans were taken prisoner. We had prisoners of war, and essentially that meant that there was a reduced German military, and that we now had people who could essentially work for us. We saw that in the primary source that they were used to carry our wounded and our dead, but it definitely weakened the German side. So in the battle, over 10,000 Germans were taken prisoner, impacting the German force. We also learned that it was called in the Veterans Affairs article, they use a really good term. They say the barrage of shells leading up to the attack was called the week of suffering. So we know that basically the entire German forces that were at Vimy Ridge were greatly impacted by the Canadians' attack. So we can add that in as well. So in the battle, over 10,000 Germans were taken prisoner, impacting the German forces. They were also impacted by the week of suffering due to the millions, because it does say millions, of shells being dropped on the German forces leading up to the attack, causing many casualties and deaths. So we have a look at the Germans and how the Germans were hurt. Now let's look at the Canadians. So for Canada, we know we had over 10,000 casualties. So we had over 10,000 casualties and 3,600 deaths. What does this mean as a whole when we look at that person died and those 10,000s of people were injured, but that also impacts their families as well and Canadians at home. So that left many families without husbands, brothers, and sons. And then men came back from war, wounded physically and emotionally, impacting their ability to work and live post-war. So men would lose arms and legs, and this is the time before we get into the prosthetics that we see today. Up until this point, we really don't have too much support for wounded veterans. And they come back, and we're going to talk about this a little more in depth, but essentially the soldiers come back to Canada and people are terrified by what they see. They see these men with burn marks over their face, shrapnel in their body, and they are very much shunned for looking the way they do because they don't look normal, and now they are disabled. And remember, in our turn of the century slideshow, we talked about how those with disabilities, they just wanted to push them away and push them out of sight because they weren't seen as normal or good. And now we have thousands of men coming back from war who are wounded, and that impacts their quality of life. They are stared at. They can't work in the same jobs, especially if it's a manual labor job and you lost your arm or your leg, and now you can't do that. And again, they don't have the prosthetics. So it greatly impacted their lives physically and then emotionally. In the video, you hear the one soldier talk about how if you weren't scared, you were a fool, and how there's two different ways of looking at the war and the Battle of Vimy Ridge. You look at it as this great defining moment in Canada, or you kind of see it as this horrific moment of war where you just remember the shelling and the bombing, the noise and the dirt and the mud and the bodies, and emotionally how scarring that is for you. So we have, I'll just read this over. For Canada, we had 10,000 casualties and 3,600 deaths that left many families without husbands, brothers, and sons. Let's make that into a proper sentence structure here. Men came back from war wounded physically and emotionally, impacting their ability to work and live post-war. I also do want to add something here to the German side. So something that the newspaper brought up, the Canadian Globe, or the Globe, says in the very first paragraph, "It is a black day for the German armies and for the German women who do not yet know what it means to them." So they're referring to the same idea here with Canadian casualties, that casualties and deaths don't just impact the men on the front lines, it impacts the women at home. So we could include that quote if we wanted into our point about the German soldiers and how they were also impacted at home. So we have deaths and casualties from this battle impacting families. Now, we could also then talk about as well how long-lasting the effects were. So when we think of how long-lasting it is, we now have a memorial And the effects of this war obviously meant that men couldn't live and their lives suffered for many years afterwards. But we have a memorial. We've memorialized and recognized this war since World War I. Before World War II, the monument was erected and it withstood the Second World War, and it's being revamped and revitalized. And a few years ago, we had the centenary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So it is still holding its impacts and effects with us today. So let's add in a little point about here. Canada still recognizes the impacts of the battle today with the Vimy Monument. The names of the dead are remembered and engraved. Celebrations and remembrance ceremonies are held each year. So that shows how long-lasting and how it's happened since World War I. Okay, revealing. This battle better helps us understand the war by. So there's a couple ways we can look at this. We can look at understanding the war and the actual military side of the war and the prepping and the planning and military strategy. It also helps us understand Canada's place in the war and then how we memorialize war. So we're going to look at all three of those. So the battle helps us understand the war by, first look at military strategy. In the document from the Veterans Canada, they talk about all the prep that happened leading up to the war. So we can pull specific evidence from this to talk about military strategy. So the battle better helps us understand the war by the preparation and military tactics that were used during trench warfare. So we know that they prepared for many months. So the Canadian Army prepared for many months for the attack using models and digging tunnels. Then you could get into even more detail about what the tunnels looked like, as they mentioned in the article. We know that they then used the idea of the creeping barrage. So one tactic was the creeping barrage, which, if I could spell barrage, which had the long-range shells, which had the Allies bombing the German lines, and then the soldiers following after. And essentially what this meant was that they had to time everything perfectly. So they would release hundreds of bombs on the frontline trench, and then the Canadian soldiers would go in. And as they took trench by trench and section by section, the bombing would be ahead of them. So that's how it worked. So they would bomb one area, and then the soldiers would come in after. They'd bomb another area, and the soldiers would go after. And they had to keep the timing, or else if the soldiers moved too quickly, they would get attacked by their own bombs. So this was a successful strategy that led to the capture of Vimy Ridge. So we now have the military tactics. So we've talked about the military tactics. We're going to have a lot to talk about. So let's reduce our font here. let's then talk about Canada's place in the war. So the battle helps us better understand the war by showing Canada's changing place on the world stage and within the war. Canada been seen as a small branch of the British military, but now they were standing on their own. And again, we could pull points from the Veterans Affairs, or we could pull points from the video as well as direct evidence. And then it better helps us understand the war, but it also helps us understand how we memorialize war and how we take a battle. And a battle itself is very gruesome and very it's death, it's destruction, it's not peaceful, and we take it and we memorialize it. And especially now, when we look at what we memorialize and what we give statues to, it comes into question. And we are really thinking critically about that today. Look at all the statues that are being torn down in the United States and even here in Canada of people throughout history who have been memorialized. Vimy Ridge as a whole is memorialized in a massive way. There is a huge monument. Please, if you get the chance to go to France, please, please, please go to Vimy. And I say that not to glorify the idea of war, the idea of battle, but the memorial as a whole is just a sight to be seen. It is absolutely breathtaking. You will step on that monument and have no words, because the pictures do not do it justice. It is massive, and there is just this overwhelming sense of emotion. And it's interesting the way that the video describes it, and it looks at Canada bereft and how it is not necessarily this strong memorial. When we see war memorials, you think of soldiers with rifles attacking, going at people. This is a very somber memorial. It is massive and it is big and it is breathtaking. But if you look at the figures, they're crying, they're weeping, they're sad, they're passing on the torch to those above and to raise the torch high. So it is a very interesting take on how we memorialize and remember war. So let's just quickly talk about this here. So it shows us how we remember war and what we choose or have chosen to memorialize. The French government gave Canada the land to memorialize battle, and there is the large monument which can be visited today. Canada, after the war, saw the battle as so significant that it needed to be on a large scale. Military victories were important in a country's standing. So overall, we can look at how we understand war in a few different ways, through the military perspective, like the actual strategic tactical perspective, Canada's place within the war, and then as a whole, how we memorialize war. Okay, so then the last thing here says, on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of historical significance in the context of a world war, I'm just going to change the size, there we go. How would you rate this battle? So this you can, right now I'd like you to make your own decision. How would you rate this? I think, because you can actually move this, I am going to give it probably an 8 or a 9. And I'm giving it an 8 or a 9 because I think it really helps us understand the war for Canada and how military strategy was very important, how we used our strategies in what we had. We weren't the biggest force, we weren't the strongest force, but we used our knowledge and our power in different ways to win a victory. It changed how Canada was viewed by other countries and how all of a sudden we weren't this small little country anymore. We were our own fighting force. And I believe it is in with the veterans one. This would actually be another good point that you can add in, that it helped us gain recognition enough that we could have our own signature on the Treaty of Versailles when the war ends and not just be lumped in with Great Britain. And then I think it's very significant because I personally really like to look at how we remember wars and the memorialization. In particular, looking at the 2 world wars, I have done a lot of my own research and study into that. And I think VIMI as a whole is very significant when we look at the idea of memorialization and monuments for war. And when we look back to the impact, it had a great impact and many effects on just so many Canadian lives, good and bad, for both sides. It brings us into the dark parts of war, brings us into the good parts of war. So as a whole, I think Vimy Ridge and the battle itself can cover so much when we study it. It's like a little microhistory. If we look at the microhistory of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, as a whole, it tells us a lot about Canada's standing and life during the war at the time, and then us today and how we memorialize wars. So that would be my ranking for that. And then you have your own option to do that. So we have gone through this, so you can take what I've said and copy it into your own document and version of this. You definitely need to have one on Vimy Ridge done for yourself. So I suggest just taking what I've done, copied it. I might even just post this up for you guys as well. And now you're going to do your own. So let's go back to the slideshow here. So we've done Vimy. Now on the next slide, it says, explore one battle from World War I, complete the historical significance sheet for your battle. So you can choose from one of these topics, Ypres, Beaumont-Hamel, Somme, or Passchendaele. And we've given you like a little bit of a description. So Ypres was known for the use of gas, chlorine gas. It was the first time chlorine gas was really used in the World Wars. Beaumont-Hamel was the sacrifice of the Newfoundland Regiment. So Newfoundland was not yet a part of Canada. So this was a very defining moment for them, which later became part of Canada. The Somme highlights the futility of war with major casualties. This is a very long battle with a lot of death and destruction. And then we have Passchendaele, which shows the horrendous conditions of war meeting the harsh weather. Passchendaele is known for its mud and just endless rain. So choose one of these 4. And you are going to, so you can actually click on them and it will say next slide and it will bring you to the proper slides for it. And you can go and for each battle, there is videos, information, and again, more primary sources for you to watch and gather enough information that you can create your own historical significance sheet. Then at the end, once you've done your one, you're going to go down to here where it says share your knowledge. Head to discussions on D2L and upload your historical significance chart under the topic for your battle. So in discussions, I have placed a topic of the battles of World War I, and there's different subheadings, so different smaller topics for each battle. So if you chose the Battle of Ypres, you're going to go to Ypres and you're going to upload your historical significance sheet. Then you are going to check out the topics for the other battles and explore what others found about the other battles, so the other 3. You are going to explore what others have found and fill out your own copy of the historical significance chart for each battle. So at the end, you are going to have a historical significance chart for every battle. You're going to use what others have posted and what others have said to inform your own historical significance sheet for each battle. So if we were doing this in class, essentially one group would do the Battle of Ypres, another would do Passchendaele, and then Ypres would go up and present while the class makes notes, and Passchendaele will go up and present while the class makes notes. This is just you sharing your information. So you really just have to explore one in depth, and then you still get the information from the others. So you will have a historical significance sheet for each battle, but you'll be using your peers' information to help you fill it out. Try not just to copy and paste what they say, try to put it in your own words. And I do suggest checking out a lot of the videos and information there if you're interested, because it's a very interesting topic, at least for me. Then once you've done that, so you have all this information about all these 5 different battles, including Vimy Ridge and that, you are going to rate the battles and do a reflection. So after you've shared the historical significance of your battle in discussions, you will individually rank the battles to justify your ranking using criteria for historical significance. You should create a list ranking from most significant to least significant, and then justify your ranking in a paragraph. There's no template for this. You may use any format you wish. Submit to D2L and review the rubric. So look at all these battles, so Vimy Ridge, Ypres, Passchendaele, Beaumont-Hamel, and the Somme, and decide which is most significant, which is least significant when we look at Canadian history, and then please reflect on why they are significant, and then that is going to be graded. Okay, so if you have any questions about this, please, please, please don't hesitate to ask. And this is going to be our exploration of the military contributions and the battles of World War I. So dive into it, and hopefully you enjoy and hopefully you learn a lot. Have a good day, guys.